Welcome to the Transfer Nation videocast and podcast. Transfer Nation aims to create a network and community of educators who work with and advocate for transfer and post-traditional college students. Our mission is to build community, transform culture, and empower success for transfer educators and students by sharing resources and celebrating all things transfer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Transfer Nation videocast and podcast. I'm Heather Adams, and I'm super excited to dive into a conversation today on transfer success teams and transfer student advisory boards and committees. You might call them various different things at your institution, but we are so in luck today to have Sarah Ihrig, who is a chair of her Transfer Student Advisory Committee at the University of Minnesota. She's the Assistant Director of the Transfer Student Experience at the University of Minnesota. And she's going to give us some insight into how her committee works, some of the challenges, the history, and we're just going to have a terrific conversation because this is something that transfer professionals talk about a lot. And there's been a lot of chatter about this on Transfer Nation lately. And I think there's a lot to learn about how to successfully wrangle a committee, how to successfully motivate a committee, and how to successfully build those transfer change agents on your campus. So Sarah, welcome to the program. We're so excited to have you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your role and how you came to transfer?
Well, thank you, Heather, so much for having me on the podcast. This is so fun to get to talk about all things transfer. So, I was a first-generation transfer student myself. I'm from Rochester, Minnesota, and I came to the University of Minnesota from the community college in Rochester, where I'm from. And I always kind of laugh that I stumbled into college, had no idea what I was doing, and was really, really lucky to find some great faculty and some staff there who took care of me and helped me be a successful student. And my undergraduate degree was in anthropology and archaeology, and I thought I was going to pursue a PhD in that area. And then I always joke that I spent a summer working on an archaeological dig, and I always laugh now because I don't even enjoy camping, so I don't know what I was thinking to think that that would be my life's work. But in all seriousness, I realized that I loved it, but not the way the people around me did. And so I was kind of at loose ends. But at the time, I had a student job doing filing in the Office of Admissions, kind of behind the scenes stuff, and really liked it. I liked working with people. I liked working with students, and I just love working on a college campus. And so there was an opening in the office, so I kind of took it, stuck around, and then 20 years later, I've kind of never left. I worked in the Office of Admissions for a time. While I was working there, I went and got my master's degree in higher ed policy and administration at the U, and then did academic advising in a few different units on campus. And for the last 5 years, I have been in this role, which it's centrally located. I don't work in a particular college or unit. I work in our central Office of Undergraduate Education, so kind of the academic affairs side of the undergrad world. And my whole job is transfer students, so I feel really lucky about that.
Isn't that the best when your job can just be all things transfer? And I love that you brought up the positionality of your position because it's really relevant to this conversation. A lot of us as transfer professionals are often either on academics side or the student affairs side or the enrollment management side. And sometimes we're a one-person show, right? And we're in it a little bit alone. And so we all know that it really can't just be one person at a university who's doing all things transfer. That's impossible, especially big public universities that have a lot of transfers. It's just not practical. And really, transfer kind of touches every element of a university. And so that's why I think these committees or task forces or advisory boards are so important, because you really need kind of everybody on board. So maybe tell us a little bit about the positionality of your position, and then how it came to be that you really gathered folks around you into a committee to work together on the topic.
Yeah, so I am one of those offices of one. And as I said in our kind of pre-tape little chat, it's kind of funny. Like I sit in the middle of this funny Venn diagram, right? I don't admit them, orient them, or advise them. But I get to be the hub of transfer in some ways, right? Not that I'm taking credit for all the wonderful transfer things that my colleagues do. And there are many, many, many of them. But I get to be the person who goes, hey, they're doing some cool thing over there. Maybe we could all do this thing. Or, hey, they're having this issue. Can anybody help? Anybody else know what's going on? And also, I feel like on our campus, we are doing a lot of really great and exciting things for transfers on our campus, especially in the last decade. But I think it can feel a little bit whack-a-mole, right? Like, what's the strategy or what's the overall goal, or how do we know if these things are effective or who's doing what? And so my job, and then the job of this committee, is really to kind of be that central space where we can all talk about these things from all these different units around campus. And as an Office of One, I need some help informing this role. What should my priorities be? So my position is about 7 years old, and I've been in the job 5 years. So there was a person who had the job for 2 years before I did, and he's actually the one that started this advisory committee. And it was created from the charge letter. It was created to really inform his role and to inform what his priorities should be as we grow at our university to create more structure for transfer students. And my role and then the committee really came about because I think we were realizing as we were doing an enrollment management plan and looking at the experience of all students on campus, that transfer students, well, we admitted a lot of them, we maybe didn't know as much as we should have about their experience on campus, and then looking at retention and graduation rates, weren't paying enough attention to those things. And so it really was about lifting up the transfer student experience and improving it. So I've been lucky enough to be the person who gets to lead the committee and over the past 5 years, and it's been great.
So you mentioned a charge letter, and I like to get down to kind of the nuts and bolts in case folks are trying to implement something like this on their campus. From your predecessor, was there a charge from kind of that committee, that enrollment committee, as they were looking at things? Was there a charge from a provost or someone in higher leadership, or was it really more of a grassroots kind of production, so to speak, where folks were like, all right, we need to kind of join arms and get together on this?
It was a charge actually that came from the vice provost of undergraduate education. So the office that I report through. Yeah. And I think that is always really helpful.
That's powerful. It gives it some teeth and some weight a little bit, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I felt very lucky to be really supported in my work and in my role on my campus, honestly, by leadership. Of course, there's never enough money for anything, or for everything that we want to do. But I really have felt supported. And as I said, I think there was a lot of great stuff going on, but in a big, R1 institution, we have like 8 undergraduate colleges and another 4 or 5 health science programs that admit undergrads. And we're one of the largest campuses geographically. We're spread out over 2 cities. And so having just somebody that can help just get that together, through the transfer lens, I think was important.
That makes a lot of sense. So there isn't really a transfer universal model then, right? It sounds like you were saying kind of whack-a-mole. I love that term. That there's good things going on all over the place, but there's not a united front. So how has that worked with this committee? Is this committee forming that? Is it getting there? Is it working super smoothly? How's it developed?
Yeah. So I think the committee has gone through a few different iterations, I think like most committees do. And it's a big group. We have representatives from the colleges. We have representatives from housing, our financial aid area, student affairs, certainly, orientation, admissions. I've had Veterans Affairs folks, pop in there. And I'm also on a lot of those committees. So it's a lot of cross-pollination. And I would say that on its own, I want to give credit to all my transfer admission colleagues. They have, I think, part of the outgrowth on our campus, kind of separate but congruent with mine, has been their work too, and making the admissions process run smoothly. Even though the colleges kind of can have run their own transfer admission process, I think they've done a great job of not centralizing, but collaborating on their end too. So it's been a nice parallel then with, okay, so we're working on admitting them and that process feeling a little more cohesive. So what happens when they get here? How are the services we're offering them and the onboarding that they're getting feeling perhaps a little more centralized?
That handoff and smoothing out that handoff. Yeah. Great.
Yes. Yeah. And then the success through degree, right? I mean, I think that's the part. I think oftentimes it's, well, we've admitted them. Now they're just students, and we know that that's not the case. And
The
so I think
irony,
it,
the transfer pathway, it doesn't end at transfer. It ends at graduation and grad school and onward and workforce. It's this through line through the whole thing. Mm.
exactly. Yeah. And so, so it's a pretty big group. And so, there can be anywhere from 20 to 25 people at a meeting, and a few more that are invited to meetings or on the listserv. And so sometimes the group has gone through different iterations where it can feel more like it's an updated information sharing group, which is fine. I think there's really value in that too, and just kind of getting together to either commiserate, share ideas, work on a problem together, and just update each other. And then in 2018, we did some subcommittee work. And I wish I could remember the 4 different areas that we worked on, but they were in the area of things like transfer credit, communication, support services. And so we had subcommittees that got together and worked on these areas and identified priorities. And then from that, it was my job then to take some of those action items and either bring them to the groups on campus, like financial aid, for instance, or orientation that could make some of those changes happen, or to implement them myself.
That's wonderful. And are there specific examples of things you were able to implement? Maybe even with an office that's maybe not as obvious or a little more challenging in kind of in the transfer relations. I'd love to kind of see some of those results.
Yeah. So one thing, and I believe I'm sure they were working on this and thinking of it before, but one thing I was really excited about is that we were able to talk to the Office of Student Finance about the communications they send to new transfer students, and to revise those to be more transfer friendly and transfer specific. And so they were able to update those communications to that office. That was a big success. The other thing that came out of that, and maybe we want to talk more about it later, but was a transfer advocacy training for staff and faculty who are interested in learning more about transfer students and supporting transfer.
You don't know me very well yet, but you definitely already know that I want to hear about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, so I'm going to come back to that because I'm really, really interested in the advocacy training. But I love these really concrete things you were able to do, right? And sometimes they seem a little, when I was working with a committee, there would be little things that seem kind of obvious, like wording on a website, or just changing some language, or making it transfer friendly, making sure the tour guides have transfer friendly language to use and a transfer friendly lens. But it makes the world of difference, as you know, as a transfer student, as many of the people listening here who are transfer students know, that just seeing on a website that it says welcome transfers, or it's addressing a commuter issue or a transfer specific issue in the transfer community, really changes the lens and the way that a student can view how that university is welcoming them. So I love those. Those are huge movements, actually, that you've created. Even though sometimes I know they seem like, oh, we did this and this, but it really has a significant impact.
Yeah. And I think, what that committee has helped as far as my role goes too, is to help me identify gaps in services and think, okay, well, if there's a central need for this, then maybe it's programming that I can do. Um, so I always laugh that I don't want to create programming for the sake of programming. I mean, if colleges or another office is doing it, but another outgrowth of that committee too, and then maybe this is more than you want to hear about, but was we created a first 6 weeks calendar for transfer students. That was another idea the committee had. And they're not all transfer specific things, but it's okay, what are things that we want transfer students to know about in those first 6 weeks on campus? And the other thing was communication, was also websites. We created some common verbiage. What are we going to call transfer students, on our websites, and getting colleges to use common language on their admission pages and other places.
So important. See, again, like something not necessarily what folks are thinking about, but so obvious once you do say it out loud. You're like, yes, of course. We need a universal language. We need to understand what we're talking about and actually name it, and make sure that we're identifying and naming it and welcoming it on our campuses. I love that. That's really cool. A 6-week calendar to give a foundation and to give some roots and some legs to your first year experience as a transfer coming in. That's so fabulous. So for people who are either wanting to create a transfer success team on their campus or transfer advisory board, or for people who maybe have one and it's kind of dormant or tough to wrangle, because as a person who was chair of a transfer success team, there are challenges, like with any committee, to get folks to show up, to get folks to be consistent, and then everybody has a lot on their plates anyway. So to move forward action items, it can be a lot, and it does end up falling probably on your shoulders as the transfer point person. What are some of the challenges that you've kind of faced with the team, and how have you sort of wrangled your way through those challenges?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think the purpose is really hard. Is it an update committee and information sharing, or do you have a goal and things? Is it a working committee, or is it strictly an advisory committee where I bring things to them and say, hey, what do you think? And I think it's okay to be all of those things. The challenge, I think, is to know yourself before you call a meeting or you ask people to serve in that meeting is, what do you need the committee to be? So I think that's what I would say. In addition to that, it's who should be on the committee. And I know that seems like obvious perhaps, but I find that, it depends on if it's again, an advisory group, or is it a decision-making body? So for instance, I have representatives from all of our undergraduate colleges on the group, which wonderful and valuable partners. I need them there. But some colleges have their director of student services on the committee, who can make decisions about what their unit is doing with regard to advising current transfer students. And some have their transfer admission person on the committee. And there are pluses and minuses to both, right? The transfer admission person works with transfer students day in and day out. They know the issues. Their whole job is transfer, but often they're not in the position to make a decision. And so if they can take that back and feel comfortable advocating, great. And so I've kind of left it up to the college or the unit to determine who they want to send to represent on the committee. But it can sometimes lead to some question then of like, should I be on this group? Should so-and-so be on this group? And I don't always have a great answer for that. So I think it's kind of being aware sometimes of who's in the room. And sometimes if there's going to be a very specific type of meeting happening where I need decisions or input of a specific kind, then I might send an email ahead of time letting people know that and asking them that someone come along to the meeting who can maybe make a decision or maybe knows transfer more than the usual representative on that group.
Super smart, super smart. I want to talk a little bit about kind of future goals and get a little bit deeper into what you were talking about if you're considering having sort of committees within the committee, again, to kind of focus on information sharing versus advocacy versus pushing things forward. But I'm also curious how you integrate students into the advisory board or student point of view. Do students sit on the board? Do you have student leaders who are involved or come in at times? How does that work?
Yeah, in theory, yes. We have two transfer student groups on our campus. One of them is a chapter of Tau Sigma Honor Society, which a lot of people are familiar with. And another one, yes, love them, is our homegrown University Transfer Student Board. And they are the kind of community advocacy building piece on campus, and everybody can be a part of that group. So I've always asked a board member from our advisory group or transfer advisory committee to be at our advisory committee meetings. That's too many advisory committees in there, maybe. Hopefully you can follow. And honestly, their attendance and availability has been hit and miss. But I do bring issues to them. I think that's the key thing is I make a point to bring things the committee is considering or discussing to that group.
Really smart. Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge with transfer student leaders in general, right? They have a limited time. They have a lot on their plate. They're figuring out navigation of the university and of their educational path. And then they're also student leaders on top of that. So I know that can be a challenge. I do think it's important on these advisory boards to find ways to kind of get the student feedback and student point of view so that we're really seeing things through a student-centric lens. I love that you do that. So in terms of future goals and future work that you'd like to do with this committee, are there ways in which that you want to see it grow? I love that you're really flexible with it and allowing it to be whatever is needed at the time, right? So sometimes it is just info sharing and information sharing and making sure everyone's on the same plate. Sometimes it's real advocacy work. Sometimes it's nitty gritty. Let's do some actual organizing and planning to make sure our practices are transfer friendly. What in the future are you hoping to accomplish with this group?
Well, we are actually doing big things on around transfer on our campus. So we are in the middle um, of planning and writing a strategic plan for transfer for the whole campus, which we hope will then be a 3 to 5 year plan. It's really big picture and ambitious, and I'm really excited about it. And so the Transfer Advisory Committee is a key part of that. So I spent October and November with a small group of people, because you can't write a strategic plan with 30 people as a draft. With about 5 or 6 of us sat down and wrote some goals, and we spent our meetings this fall in November and December kind of introducing the plan. And then we just had our last meeting of the year on Friday, where we got into small groups via Zoom room. And so I'm hoping, as we continue to iterate the plan and we bring drafts back to that group, that they can continue to be the sounding board. And then eventually, the goal is that every year or every other year, we have a large transfer summit on our campus, which is for, deans of the directors of undergraduate education and leaders on campus. And the Transfer Advisory Committee traditionally has helped with that summit by being like kind of leads at tables to take notes and facilitate discussion. And so I'm hoping that the transfer committee for the next year can really help launch the strategic plan, help me hone it, help me figure out what's realistic, and inform it as we continue to move forward.
Okay, so for those that are just listening to this on the podcast and not watching the video, I'm like dancing, I'm hopping up and down on my yoga ball here. I'm so excited for you, Sarah. This is so big. This is wonderful that you're committing to this strategic plan and that you've got everybody's kind of voice and insights and point of view involved. How exciting. I cannot wait to have you back next year or in 6 months to talk about kind of the developments. And when is your summit?
I'm hoping to schedule it for March or April.
Okay.
So
all right.
Right now we're in stakeholder feedback mode, and then
perfect.
And then it's figuring out, okay, great, we have buy-in. Now what? Yikes! The scary part, right? You got to do it.
Oh, well, I'm going to really enjoy following the progression and seeing how it goes. If you're open to coming back and visiting us and sharing, because I think that would really be an interesting arc for folks to learn from and to watch. So before we wrap up, I do want to hear a little bit about this incredible other program, which I think we could probably do a whole episode on, but let's touch on it. Why not? Transfer Advocacy Training, or transfer, is that what you're calling it? Transfer Advocacy Training? Mm-hmm. Tell us what this is and how this came to be from the committee.
So again, another great idea. So academic success of transfer students, right, is key. And we know that on our campus, that our transfer students struggle sometimes in those big gateway courses. They have higher DFW rates, transfer shock, all of those things play into it. So, and we wanted to get more staff and faculty buy-in and understanding kind of who transfer students were. And so a subgroup of the transfer committee had this great idea that we should do this advocate training. And so it started in 2018. So I do them once a semester, and it's a 2-hour training that consists of me doing some sharing of data about who our transfer students are, why they matter, how they're different. And that is both some demographic data. I'm lucky to have just so much data on our campus about transfer students. Both, pre-orientation survey, SERU data, for those of you are familiar with the SERU consortium, again, demographic data, retention data, graduation data. So I share some of that and probably bore them to tears a little bit because I get into the weeds a bit. And then, though we bring it back, we have a student panel that comes and shares their experiences as transfer students. And then we spend the last half hour really digging into and having people develop their own transfer plan, which is a checklist of best practices, and then asking them to brainstorm some things and goals they want to do, and then some great discussion. And I know this sounds like a little silly component of it, but what I give everybody who participates also is that I am a transfer advocate kind of window cling or sticker.
I love it. I love it. For those that are listening at home. Yeah, for those that are listening at home, This is such a great idea. It's a square sticker that says, "I am a transfer student advocate." The words say it all, and those small words and small stickers have huge impact to really help students feel supported and welcome, and when they walk through the door frame.
I really, 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 really hope that they put those in their office. I think it's for transfer students to see that, it's like, oh, this person gets me. And so I'm really hoping they're up all over campus. I try to push that. It's hard to do via Zoom, but.
Oh, I hope they're doing that too. I am right there with you. That is not at all a silly thing. That is a really impactful thing that can have, that is a small thing that can have a big impact, is how I should say it. I love that you're doing that. And I really do want to have you come back and talk more about that in another episode, because I think this is something that we could really break down in nuts and bolts of how to build a transfer advocacy training at your campus. Who are the audiences that you're presenting the training to? What are the needs of those various audiences on your campus? And I think we could learn a lot from you. So thank you for sharing that, and for sharing all of this amazing insight into your transfer advisory board at your campus. You've given so much insight and kind of tips and thoughts on the process of working with a transfer advisory board. Any last words of wisdom for somebody who's trying to really get that strategic plan going on their campus, get buy-in from all of the stakeholders, and get everybody united on a project around transfer?
What I would say with the Transfer Advisory Committee, and I have been mentored very well by some amazing women that I have worked with and for. And I think one thing I've learned about leading a committee that big, especially one that can be really vague, is that people like to know why they're gathering, why they're meeting. So I think having an intended purpose, but also, and this is something that I didn't do enough of at the beginning, was to keep reiterating and celebrating the accomplishments of that group. So remind people every meeting, since our last meeting, this is what has happened. This is what we have done. This first 6 weeks calendar that we started 2 years ago is now going strong and has 60 submissions every semester. This transfer advocate training is now going strong and has 50 participants every time we do it. So I think reminding people of their successes and celebrating that would be the biggest piece of advice. And also use your data. There's so much of it. And I know that access to that data can be really hard, but I think so often in general in higher ed, and especially when working with a subgroup of students like transfer students, I think a lot of us in student affairs world intrinsically go, well, but students, like, of course, but students, that's why we should do this thing. But students is not really sometimes a good enough reason to someone who's worrying about budget or higher level admins who have different priorities. And so make friends with any data person on your campus and use that data well.
Sarah, that is tremendous, tremendous advice on both fronts. Celebrating the successes along the way, building momentum with those benchmarks of look at what you've done, celebrating the transfer experience, but the transfer champions, celebrating these transfer champions. And while we could do 30 episodes on utilization of data. I think hopefully now folks are collecting the data more and more, but it is hard sometimes to know what to do with all of it, especially if you're not somebody who loves to dive into it or knows how to read it and how to make the case to other folks about it. So we will put a pin in that for next time. That will be our 4th or 5th episode when we have you come back, Sarah. Thank you. It's been a joy to have you here. Really appreciate you sharing your transfer knowledge with us.
Oh, Heather, thank you. This is so much fun. Clearly, I'm talking and talking. I could talk transfer all day. So
Me
anytime.
Too.
Thank you so much for listening. To continue the transfer conversation, be sure to join the Transfer Nation Facebook group at tinyurl.com/wearetransfornation. You can also follow us on Instagram at wearetransfornation and on Twitter at transferpride. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/tnationtube. If you have ideas for future episodes of the Transfer Nation videocast and podcast, please email us at wearetransfornation@gmail.com. We can't wait to continue celebrating all things transfer with you. And as always, in transfer pride.